And we are back. Brothers of the Serpent podcast.
Thanks.
With the Snake Bros Institute of Advanced Coprolite Studies, where there are no degrees, only certificates of ignorance. And we are going through the story of the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord and the Knights Templar and the Grail and lots of other things too. Pretty much everything else in the world.
Somehow I'm just suspicious pyramids are involved.
So we ended with the Knights were clearly digging beneath the Temple Mount when they were in Jerusalem, and that they did not find what they were looking for. And that's probably why eventually two of them go back to France, or they go back to Europe. I'm not sure if it was in France. They go back to Europe. They meet with Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, and they actually officially establish the Knights Templar as an official order of the church, right? A militant order of the church of knights. And then he basically causes the Gothic cathedral building to explode all over the place, and Bernard of Clairvaux does.
Yeah. So that's when they start getting members and all this stuff.
Yes, and he starts to give speeches, sermons, I guess, talking about them and how badass they are. And so members and donations of land and money come in from all over the place, and so they become extremely wealthy. Also, they're given an interesting number of dispensations from the church that are not really normally given to people, chief among which is the ability to design and build their own churches. Okay. Normally there's a specific design for churches, and they're usually a cross shape. If you look at them from top down, they have this basic long Christian cross shape. So when you come in the entrance, it's got a long central area, and then there's two like naves or whatever they're called that come off the side.
The ones I visited were shaped that way.
Yeah.
Does that mean the Templars didn't build them?
That's right. The Templars built round churches. But the ones you've visited, at least
maybe I have visited.
The mind-blowing ones are probably a result of the Gothic cathedral building.
Yeah.
You know. So that one was a weird one. And the other one that was interesting that they were given the ability to do was to do money lending, basically. Usury is what it's called, I think. Which was against the law, right? It was not legal to loan people money for money.
Yeah.
But they were able to do it. So they started an international, among other things, they had an international banking system, which greatly
increased their wealth.
Yeah. And the wealth of a lot of people.
A lot of people, yeah.
Yeah. You had the ability to basically go to any Templar temple and deposit a shitload of gold or whatever you had, a bunch of wealth, and they would give you a written script, just a piece of paper that you could fold up and stick in your wagon somewhere, and then you could travel to any other city that had another Templar temple, go in there and give them the script, and they'd give you all the gold.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Right.
Way cheaper to travel without all that gold.
And way safer.
Yeah.
You know?
And basically cheaper, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have to hire a bunch of guards.
Right, yeah. Yeah. And then Templar script became, over time, used as money, right? So you would deposit something in the bank, and they would give you the script for it, and then to pay somebody, you would just give them the script.
Yeah, they were called temp backs.
False, but funny. They should have been called that. So I ended.
Send us straight to pyramids with temp backs.
Yeah. So we ended the last segment by saying that they dug beneath the temple, but they didn't find what they were looking for. So why do we think that? Well, they seem to have had a crisis of, a crisis of what they were going to do. So these guys come back. They didn't really establish an actual monastic order of knights. They just were a band of guys, and they went to Jerusalem and they dug. And you would expect that if they had have found something like the Ark of the Covenant, they would have come back in triumph or whatever. You know, who knows what they might have done if they actually would have found it. But they didn't. But they found something. They found something because when they came back, again, like I've said multiple times now, all this architecture starts to explode all over. And the other weird thing is that they all seem to be master masons and architects after this, which they weren't previous.
All this digging has made us badass builders.
Right. Suddenly they understand sacred geometry and all that stuff. So
we dug for 9 years, and I don't think, maybe, I don't know. I couldn't build a cathedral.
Yeah. I'd have to do a lot of studying first, right? So why do we think they didn't find the Ark? Well, there's a lot of evidence that the Ark was already gone from, like, first of all, there's the Cabrana Gast and the legends that we already talked about.
Yeah. And then there's all the stuff in Ethiopia, like the traditions and all the stuff surrounding the Ark.
But even if you just, let's say that we're just like most mainstream scholars are they just dismiss that whole thing. That the reason there's ancient Judaic traditions in Ethiopia is because merchants and so on and so forth. And there's let's just say, okay, forget the whole Ethiopia thing. Can we figure out when the Ark disappeared from the story, right? Because if you really think about it, in the Bible, and we're going to be talking a lot about the Bible because that's the source of a lot of this stuff. But it also comes from the Talmud and a whole bunch of other ancient traditions, not just biblical ones. That the Ark suddenly begins to it appears in Exodus, and then it dominates the story after that. Yeah. It's in everything, and it's doing everything and killing everyone in sight. Right?
Yeah.
And then once it gets so the story is very fascinating to me because of Moses in Egypt, right? And Graham goes through this whole thing too. So like basically what Graham does eventually is he's like, wait a minute, what exactly is the Ark in the first place?
It's a glorified fishing lure.
What?
You can catch all kinds of fish with that thing. Just move the water out of the way and there they all are.
Was not expecting that one.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's true. But if you look at the story of Moses, and anyone who went to, Bible school, remember this kind of stuff, Sunday school or whatever. The story of Moses. First, you have and to me, this is kind of hilarious. We've talked about this idea on the podcast before. The idea of somebody getting their fate. Somebody has their future read to them and then they're like, no, and they try to stop it and that causes it to happen.
Yeah.
Right. That's exactly what happens to the Egyptian Pharaoh in the story of Moses. His wizard seer guy comes up and gives him this prophecy that one son shall arise from these slaves that they have, these Hebrew slaves or whatever, that will kick his ass. And he's like, kill every single one of them, right? Kill all their male children or whatever. Yeah. And that results in Moses' parents putting him in the little reed basket with pitch and setting him adrift on the River Nile, where he drifts along and then is picked up by the Pharaoh's daughter and raised as a prince in the Pharaoh's own house. Yeah. Where he's taught all of their esoteric.
And you would think that they would connect the dots. Like there's a little male baby in this basket. It must be one of the children of, But
the
of course
idea, the
princess is like, no, it's cute.
Yeah. And who knows how many daughters the Pharaoh has?
Yeah.
They had.
That's a good point.
They had hundreds of wives, so
they
had innumerable daughters, right? So they had innumerable grandsons or whatever. So he was just another boy being raised in their household, and he was just really good at what he did. Since he was being raised in the Egyptian mystery schools, he was being sent to learn their deepest, most secret and treasured and sacred and esoteric traditions, and he was really good at it. And for a while, he was actually considered to be an heir to the throne.
Yeah.
All the stories coming true, basically, because the Pharaoh's like, kill them all, right? Basically.
And it's also interesting, too, that that whole story of the floating of the baby in the basket
saved from water,
is really similar to a lot of other ancient stories.
Very ancient stories.
And it's like even like Osiris himself
Yeah.
in the Egyptian tradition is put in the coffer and floated out into the...
Right. The saved from water theme is all throughout ancient traditions. The hero saved from water,
Yeah.
basically. And Graham talks about that, quote unquote, saved from water. So who knows how much of that is esoteric or if the story is true or whatever. The point is that Moses comes away from all this. Eventually he has to leave because there's something that goes wrong where he finds out that, you know, he's in school somewhere and he hears that his people, quote unquote, his people are being mistreated. It's not clear how he learned that his people were not the Pharaoh's people. But obviously he seems to know. And so then he goes to see for himself and then he sees them beating somebody or whatever. And he kills that guy who's beating them. And then he has to flee because he's afraid that he'll.
Yeah.
So he's like, "Shah!" Kills the guy. And then he just runs into the desert and he's gone for 40 freaking years. That's when he encounters the infamous burning bush. And Graham points out a lot of interesting stuff in that. How being a sorcerer, you know, who like he would have grown up in tradition of summoning, you know, like a divination and all that kind of stuff is, and you know, pardon me if any of you out there who actually practice magic, and forgive me for not knowing what the hell I'm talking about, but dealing with spirits is a big part of being a powerful sorcerer magician guy, right? And one of the most ancient ways of and known ways of dealing with these things is learning their quote unquote true name. Yeah. Because that gives you power to use their power whether they want you to or not. Once you know their true name, you can call on their true name and then that somehow makes you a channel of their power and then you can direct it however you want.
Well, all of that stuff comes from Solomon.
Right.
Like the Tetragrammaton and all of this stuff that supposedly came from Solomon's wisdom is like, you have to know its name.
Yeah.
Like once he was given the ring, basically he learned all the names of the demons.
Yeah.
And then he could summon them and command them and all this kind of stuff. And that's where all of that tradition comes from.
So it's interesting.
Still ties back into
right. It's interesting that Moses, in encountering the burning bush and this thing is talking to him, he goes, "What is your name,
yeah.
oh Lord?" He's trying to
See
get
if I can trick you.
Yeah. And it gives him a riddle, and from then on, but it knows Moses' name, and from then on, it's reversed, basically. All of Moses' ability to do any kind of quote-unquote magic has to go through that guy, through that spirit or whatever, through the god of the bush.
And it's interesting that the answer that he gives him is, "I am what I am," or "I am that I am."
Yeah, that's the Tetragrammaton. Yeah, the eternal mystery.
Yeah,
the name of God.
Those words translated
to Yahweh,
simply, to the alphabet or whatever. What the heck's the name of the
Hebrew alphabet?
Yeah, the Hebrew alphabet is YHWH.
Yeah. And then you just add random vowels in there.
Yeah.
But the convention is Yahweh. You add an A and an O. Yeah.
And another
or A and an E.
Another translation of that is Jehovah.
Right. Yeah, that's a King James corruption or something like that I think they were saying, biblical scholars are saying. But anyway, the point is that there are clues throughout the biblical story of Moses that he was a sorcerer or a magician of the highest order. And he tries to gain control over the situation where he's dealing with the burning bush, and he doesn't get it. The thing doesn't fall for it. But anyway, it's really cool how he goes into all the stuff that Moses does when he goes back to try to get the Hebrews out of Egypt. All the things that happen, the whole throwing down of the staff, a lot of them, like for the first 4 or 5 quote unquote plagues that Moses brings upon Egypt, Pharaoh's unimpressed. You know? He's like, meh, because his guys can do it too.
Yeah.
And the first thing happens, they go there, Aaron throws his rod down, it turns into a snake, and Pharaoh's like, big deal, guys. Calls up his dudes, and they throw their staffs down, and they all turn into snakes, but then Aaron eats theirs, right? I've always thought of that as an esoteric reference to a debate.
They all throw down their arguments, and his just totally destroys all their arguments. He
destroys their arguments, and they learn that he's actually a part of their order, but higher than they are. In their order. And then they turn to Pharaoh and they say, sorry.
Yeah, because the serpent is the symbol of knowledge.
Symbol of knowledge, yeah. So they turn to Pharaoh and they're like, sorry, guy, we can't actually help you with this dude because we just found out that he's actually above us in our own order.
Wow, that's cool.
So that was what that looked like to me. But later on, when they they turn the water into blood, Pharaoh's like, meh, they can do that too. And then there's the flies or what. It gets up to a point, and Pharaoh's like, okay, maybe they can't do that. I've never seen that before. But even the water thing, the splitting, the dividing of the Red Sea, the actual description of it, where it's like he holds out his hand and the water starts to move apart and then it stacks up on itself on either side.
Yeah.
Right. So it describes it as being so deep and then it stacks up on itself so that it's twice as deep on either side as it was when it was just laying flat.
Right.
And then they're able to cross on dry land. And then Graham Hancock actually digs up a much more ancient story straight out of Egyptian lore where the Pharaoh in this story, and it's far more trite. It's not, no one's running for their lives or trying to escape or anything. His Pharaoh's just out on a boat with like 20 young virgins is what the story says. These hot chicks or whatever, and he's out there with them on the boat, and one of them drops a piece of jewelry into the lake, and she's like, and he's like, "Don't worry, I got this." And he calls up his chief wizard magician guy, and that guy's like, "Yeah," and he splits the lake in the same way, and the description is exactly the same. The water moves apart, stacks up on either side, that it was like 6 cubits deep.
Yeah.
Or 12 cubits deep, and then it stacks up on either side so that it's 24 cubits on either side, and then he walks down on dry land and finds her little bauble sitting on top of a potsherd in the bottom of the lake.
Yeah.
And he picks it up and he hands it to her, right? So that's a much, much older story in the Egyptian lore. And the idea of that being is that what Moses was doing through all that stuff was basically Egyptian magic.
Yeah.
Okay. And that it has precedent in older Egyptian stories. Whether you believe that Egyptian magic is real or not, the point is that the precedent was there in the stories themselves.
Yeah.
So the ark is created by Moses out in the desert, and that's a whole crazy story too. But there's a whole lot of interesting ideas about what it means exactly, because the ark itself and the design for it come from Egypt. They found one in Tutankhamun's tomb. You can see pictures of it.
Yeah.
It's exactly the same design, except for the things that are on top are Isis and some other goddess. They're not the quote-unquote cherubim angels.
Right.
But it's the same basic design. Acacia wood plated in gold outside and in. But the one that they found in Tutankhamun's tomb is actually nested boxes. Right? Like think of a Russian doll or whatever. You open it and there's a smaller doll inside, and you open that one and there's a smaller one in there. So the boxes are nested. So if you look at them in the museum, the box that they found in Tutankhamun's, the first one is about the right size, 2 cubits by 1.5 cubit, whatever.
Yeah.
But there's all these smaller ones, and they've taken them out and set them aside, but like they were nested.
Yeah.
Inside of it.
Like a capacitor almost.
Right. It's just like a capacitor. You have
You have an insulator and
a conductor
in layers
that are not touching each other.
Yeah.
So if you had some source of energy on the inside of that, and you're carrying it around in the desert, and that thing it's rolling around in there, you could imagine that it could build up quite a charge, and then it could kill people using celestial fire and sparks, just like it says in all the stories.
Yeah, but how does it move water around like that?
I don't know. Obviously, it's not a conventional, what we think of as a capacitor, but it seems to have been built on something along those lines. In other words, one of the things that Graham Hancock points out is that the ark, for being one of the most revered objects in Judaic, in the Judaic writings or whatever, it doesn't seem to do things you would expect from a made up thing, right? It doesn't raise the dead, for example. It kills a lot of people, but it doesn't ever revive anybody. It doesn't change the weather. It doesn't make it rain, So basically, I guess the idea that he was trying to point out is that if you expect it to be, if you're going from the idea that maybe it's a legendary, just a made up thing, maybe they had a real box, but they attributed all these magical things to it that it didn't really have, then you would expect it to do things that it doesn't do. Instead, it acts more like a machine that has a very specific purpose.
Yeah.
But that isn't it. Just like any machine, it's fallible and is subject to wear and tear. It gets less potent over time. But when it was brand new, it was really scary. It would kill many people all at once.
Yeah.
Right. But like, if you have a box that actually has God in it, you would expect that any war you went into carrying that thing, if God's on your side, you win, right? You win.
Yeah.
they don't always win, and the ark gets actually captured by the Philistines at some point, the Philistines. And it makes them sick, and they all get boils and leprosy and everything, and they keep taking it to different towns, and they're terrified of it, and the people in the towns, all their cattle dies and stuff, and they're like, get it out of here! And they eventually put it on a cart and like slap the oxen, and they just wander off down the road by themselves because no one wants to be anywhere near it. And they just aim it in the direction of Israel's border, and then it goes down the road by itself and ends up in the farm field of I can't remember the guy's name, but he's like, holy crap, it's the Ark of the Covenant. They go over there and they're all looking at it. His whole family comes up, like 70 people from the village. And then one of them opens it and they all die.
Jeez.
What?
How did they know that happened? I guess they just, whoever eventually found it.
Yeah, some Levites eventually showed up and retrieved it.
Yeah, and they just see that everybody's dead around it.
Yeah, the Levites showed up in their hazmat suits. The special suits that they had to wear to carry the ark around. And if you read about that, it's like layered with leather, and then the cloth that they wore on the outside was threaded with gold and silver threads.
And stones and all kinds
and it
of
had
stuff.
precious stones in it and everything like that. And
that's
even then it would kill them sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, there was the stories about how, like, when they had it in a tent or whatever,
yeah,
the priests that had to service it would go into the tent and wearing all their specific garb that they had to do just right, and they'd have a rope tied around their waists.
Yeah,
and they'd go in because if it killed them, the other priest could drag the body
out without going in there and getting killed themselves. Yeah, yeah, that was the tent was called the tabernacle.
Yeah,
and they even did that even when it got into the temple. They still did the rope tying thing because you could go in there and still kill you. But so eventually David gets his hands on it. You know, he wants to build the temple to contain the ark, and he goes and retrieves it, and he's bringing it to Jerusalem, and it kills another person on that trip. And that was a simple thing, like the ark was on its cart, you know, and they were going over some bumpy part of the road, and some guy reaches out to steady it, and it kills him like instantly. Right, and David's like, whoa, whoa.
Yeah, what do they call it? Like the divine fire or something like
celestial
that?
Fire and sparks. Yeah. And what was interesting is the first time that happens after Moses gets it built, right? He supposedly has a dream where he gets the plans for the ark directly from God, and then he gives those plans to the artificer, the guy who's going to build it out of the acacia wood and gold plating and all that stuff, and with the mercy seat on top, which is the lid, and it's like they said it was a hand's width in thickness. That's a lot of gold.
Yeah,
it must have been really heavy. But anyway, the first two people who were killed by it after it was constructed and the stones were put in it, the tablets, were like grandsons of Aaron, who was Moses' brother, one of the Levites. They go in there with their censers, you know, the censers that are on chains that are burning incense. They put on their special garments and everything, and they go in there with the censers, and it kills them both. And then Moses has them, he freaks out, and he's like, get the bodies and take them out of the camp way far away from us, and don't put them anywhere near any water. That's weird.
Yeah, that sounds like...
So the implication that is sort of given by, you know, the religious implication of that is that they were cursed by God, and so they were just like, don't give them any special burial, they don't get any last rites. Somehow they were displeasing to God, and so we just have to get rid of them. But really, it looks like containment, right? Mm-hmm. That something is wrong with the bodies, now we have to get them out of here.
Yeah.
Right. That's what it sounds like to a technological person.
Yeah, that reminds me of the well, we did the podcast on that weird religious group that had the Varas.
The Zoroastrians.
The Zoroastrians, yeah. Like what they had to do with these bodies, the dead bodies, they keep them far away from the water and all this kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, that's obviously you want to keep dead bodies away from water, but
if it's your water source, yeah.
But that's just weird. Eerily similar.
But he's like, get him out of come get him out of the camp. And you know, like the you have to think about that like these were treasured high, you know, they were grandsons of Aaron, which means they were high up in the hierarchy. And normally they would be given good burials, you know, with a sort of ceremonies and all this kind of stuff, the ceremonies of the dead that they gave to their dead or whatever. But he was like, no, just we can't do any of that. Get them out of the camp.
Yeah.
And it was an enormous camp, estimated of like between 500,000 and 800,000 people.
Yeah.
Or more. So that's a big camp to carry 2 bodies. That's a long way. Yeah. Especially considering that the place where the tabernacle where the ark was in the middle of the camp. So that's, you're talking about miles. You're having to take them miles. Get them far away from the people. So the ark seems to is a very strange object. It does a lot of interesting things throughout its history. But anybody who wants to research that can go read Exodus. Go look at all the stuff that it does and look at the way that the people who are using it treat it. The whole Jericho thing, that guy knows what the ark is. Like when they're ready to go invade Jericho or whatever, he's like, he tells the people, you will see the ark go out onto the road towards Jericho. Wait until it's half a mile down the road before you start following it. And stay he's not saying half a mile, he's using cubits or whatever. Yeah. But basically he's like, stay half a mile back from the ark with the 4 guys that are carrying it. And then those guys go out, and then while they're circling the city and doing all that stuff, that whole rigmarole for the 7 days, everyone is a half a mile back up on the hills watching. No one is allowed to get near. It's so freaking dangerous, and he knows that it's a double-edged sword. Yeah. And all they do is shout from the mountainside when on the 7th day when they go around 7 times. And then the priests all blow their horns or whatever down there. The guys in the procession, they blow their horns, and he's like, now shout. And they're like, rah, and the walls come down. And then they go and raid the city. But he keeps everybody far back from it because it kills people. Yeah. So eventually, like I said, David gets it. And because he wants to build, he's conquered all of Canaan, and now he's got Jerusalem, and he wants to build the temple to put the ark in it. And he eventually is not the one to build it. But there's this interesting part about that story where it kills the guy who tries to keep it from falling off the ox cart. And David's like, okay, whoa. And he diverts it. He's like, I can't bring this thing into the city. I didn't realize it was this dangerous. So he diverts it over to this dude's farm, Obadiah or something like that. I can't remember what the guy's name is. Don't quote me on that. But he diverts it over to this guy's farm. And he's like, hey, I'm your king. We're going to stay here with the ark for a little while. Is that okay? And the guy's like, sure, no problem. Even though he knows it's dangerous. He's like, sure. And so David camps, and the ark sits there on the guy's land, and David watches it for a couple of months, like 3 months, to see if it'll kill anybody else. That's great. And it doesn't. Actually, from that point on, it's actually a blessing, and it actually says that God blesses the farmer, the guy who owned the land. I can't remember, Obadiah, whatever his name was. He blesses that guy, and it's not.
If it's Obadiah, that's weird because that's a book.
Yeah, it may not be. Too. That may not be. It starts with an O.
It's really short. It's like the shortest book of the Bible. Maybe that guy was like, they showed up at my house with the Ark of the Covenant.
And it was awesome.
It's just probably not short book.
Yeah, real short. But it says that he was blessed by God, but it doesn't explain why. But if you go, Graham does more research into it and finds out that there are traditions. I don't remember if they were Talmudic or whatever, but there are further traditions about it that have writings about what actually happened and what the blessing meant. And it was that all of the women in his family gave birth within 2 months, and they gave birth to multiple children at a time.
Yeah, 6.
Yeah. So he was blessed with many children and sons, basically. That was the blessing. Yeah. So however it works, like it goes in and it sits there and it makes the women give birth to full sextuplets in freaking 2 months.
That's just
that are healthy births. That's the story. Very strange. So Solomon, there's the name. Obed-Edom. That was close.
Yeah.
The Gittite, instead of carrying it to Zion. And there it stayed for 3 months. Thanks, Watcher. So Solomon eventually builds the temple, and it's clear that he's building the temple as a containment thing. And it says this multiple times, and it's interesting because the Kabrana Gast of the Ethiopians and their own legends about it say the same thing. They talk about not protecting the ark from people, but protecting the people from the ark.
Yeah.
It's said the other way around. And multiple times Graham Hancock is in various places, and he's having to talk to people through an interpreter. And he's like, wait a minute. Why do you cover it and all those things when you move it around? To protect the laity from it.
Yeah.
Wait, you mean protect it from the laity? No, to protect the laity from it. Right? It kills people. It's a deadly thing. So Solomon builds the temple, and this is an interesting part to me. Like, well, this is a big part of our show, the shamir. This is one of the things that I'm fascinated with, right? The whole thing about Solomon not being able to use any tools of iron to build the temple, right?
Yeah.
To
any copper.
No, yeah, he can't use any metal to hew the stones for the temple. So he's like, how am I going to freaking do this? So he pursues this ancient tool known as the shamir.
At the time, yeah.
I have this in this. Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, the story of him pursuing the shamir.
No, I have the story of.
We reference that story often. It's like he's trying to build a temple, and he's just like, all right. He already knows that there's this ancient artifact that could, cut stone like easily or whatever.
Right.
So we've told the story before. Like he goes to talk to an eagle.
Yeah.
Who's like supposedly the oldest eagle, and he's like hundreds of years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And he's talking to him about it. He's the oldest creature known. And the creature's telling him like, oh yeah. I don't know where it is, but my brother does, and he's way older than me.
Yeah.
So he goes to talk to his brother, and his brother basically gives him the same rigmarole. It's like, oh, you're gonna have to go talk to my brother. He's like thousands of years older than me, or whatever. And he goes and talks to that one, and he's like, oh yeah. I've never seen it. It's been lost like long before my time, but I think it's somewhere off in the desert over there in some temple.
Yeah.
And so he goes off into the desert, and apparently he finds it and finds the temple, or digs in the sand out there in the middle of the desert.
A temple buried under the sand of the desert.
That's right.
Yeah, and finds the shamir sequestered in the temple. So, according to the Bible, I'm reading this directly from the Sign of the Seal now. According to the Bible, the other items fashioned by Hiram. So Hiram was the metal worker that Solomon hired to build all the metal stuff for the temple, right? So after they got the stones up, he wanted to he plated the entire room for the Holy of Holies, quote unquote, the Holy of Holies, where the ark was kept, was a 30 foot by 30 foot by 30 foot perfect cube of stone that was plated in sheets of gold that weighed an estimated 45,000 pounds.
Now that is a science cube, folks.
That's right. And the sheets of gold were held onto the stone walls by little golden nails. So they must have drilled little bitty holes into the stone and then driven the nails into, because obviously a golden nail is not going to go through stone. So you drill holes and then you drive nails through the gold plates and into the holes in the stone to hold it up on the ceiling. So the whole room is plated in gold, including the floor. So he hires this guy Hiram, who's a foreigner and maybe an Ethiopian. It's not clear, but it seems like he might have been an Ethiopian. But Solomon hires this guy to do all the metalwork. So it says, the other items fashioned by Hiram for Solomon's temple had included the, quote, ash containers, the scoops, and the sprinkling bowls, and also 2 bronze pillars. The height of one pillar was 18 cubits, and a cord 12 cubits long gave the measurement of its girth. Got that? So also was the second pillar. He set up the pillars in front of the vestibule of the sanctuary. He set up the right-hand pillar and named it Jachin. He set up the left-hand pillar and named it Boaz. So the work on the pillars was completed. Jachin and Boaz, I discovered, Graham Hancock says, also featured in the Masonic traditions. According to the old ritual, these 2 great pillars had been hollow. Inside them had been stored the ancient records and the valuable writings pertaining to the past of the Jewish people, and amongst these records, the Freemasons claimed, had been the secret of the magical shamir and the history of its properties. He says, my curiosity was aroused by this mention of the magical shamir. What had this been? Was it just a piece of Masonic arcana, or was it referred to in the Bible? After a painstaking search, I was able to confirm that the word shamir appeared only 4 times in the Old and New Testaments, thrice as a place name and once as the name of a man. Clearly, therefore, none of these could have been the magical shamir, the secrets of which the Masons claimed had been concealed in Hiram's bronze pillars. I did find the information that I was looking for, however, not in the scriptures, but in the Talmudic Midrashic sources at my disposal. Because Moses had commanded the Israelites not to use any tool of iron in the construction of holy places, Solomon had ordered that no hammers, axes, or chisels should be used to cut and dress the many massive stone blocks from which the outer walls and courtyard of the temple had been built. Instead, he had provided the artificers with an ancient device dating back to the time of Moses himself. This device was called the shamir and was capable of cutting the toughest of materials without friction or heat, also known as the stone that splits rocks. The shamir may not be put in any iron vessel for safekeeping, nor in any metal vessel. It would burst such a receptacle asunder. It is kept wrapped up in a woolen cloth, and this in turn is placed in a lead basket filled, lead is metal, lead basket filled with barley bran, which with the destruction of the temple, the shamir vanished.
Yeah, barley bran. It's like got all these like organic.
Mm-hmm. It says you
wrap
can't,
it in wool.
It says you can't keep it in a metal vessel, but then they kept it in a lead basket. I'm like, wait a minute. Maybe they didn't think lead was metal? It's a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
I was fascinated by this odd and ancient tradition, which also claimed that the shamir had possessed, quote, the remarkable property of cutting the hardest of diamonds, unquote. I then found a collateral version of the same story, which added that it had been quite noiseless while it was at work. Okay.
I want that tool.
Right. So think of the other things that were kept in the Boaz and Joachim pillars. Okay. Besides the shamir, the history of it and all of its properties, and also all the ancient writings, right, of the ancient peoples. It says of the Jewish people or whatever, but they came from the time of Moses. So basically, we're talking about Egyptian secrets here.
Right.
So to get to the point before we end this segment, my suggestion, my thought, Graham doesn't really say this in the book, but what I immediately thought was what the Templars found when they dug beneath the Temple Mount was not the Ark because it was already gone. They found Joachim and Boaz still filled with all that stuff. Yeah,
and thus the explosion of the cathedrals.
Right,
and all that
so they
stuff.
learned all these ancient secrets of geography and all that kind of stuff from the writings and blueprints and so on and so forth in there. And then they had these amazing Masonic abilities using the shamir.
Yeah.
And if you look at Masonic rituals, they still, to this day, use Joachim and Boaz pillars in their rituals. Those are the two pillars of the Masonic.
Yeah.
So,
that's freaking awesome.
That's what they found.
And if Moses was the one who had brought that knowledge out of Egypt, then and if he was basically a more powerful magician or whatever higher in the order than any of the rest of them, maybe it's like the Masonic Lodge today. You can join the lodge and just be,
businessman guy.
Yeah, just schmoozing it up with the other business guys. Or you can join the Masonic Lodge and pursue the mysteries.
Right.
So there would have been the same type of people in Egypt at the time that were doing the Egyptian mystery schools, right? The guys that are just like,
schmoozing.
Yeah, I got a C+. Who cares? There was a hot chick in my class. And then there's the Moses guy who's like, no,
he just wants to get
busy.
the contract to move the stones down the. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if he knew that stuff and he brought that technology out of Egypt, like let's say you have the pyramids and all this crazy stuff that was built in way back in further, ancient times to Moses.
Yeah.
But he had discovered those.
Yeah.
Some of the secrets involved in that.
Yeah. And the principles and secrets were kept by the Brotherhood of the Serpent, which was present, whatever they called it then.
Yeah.
The schools of ancient knowledge. They would have been doing the same thing as you look at the quote unquote mystery schools and you see the best ones in those, and those are the ones that you choose to give your Enki knowledge to.
Yeah. That's cool. It all comes back to snakes
and the shamir.
Hypnotizing old serpents. with the Brothers of the Serpent podcast bumper music. Anyway, all I can think about is the Shamir. I want one.
I want one. So let's go back to the point where Moses is. They're around the mountain, Sinai, and the whole weird segment of the Bible where he's like, "Okay, I'm going to go up on this mountain and I'm going to talk to God." Right. Yeah. So he's got that guy building the ark. He goes up there the first time. First, he makes this weird edict, right? Like anybody approaching the mountain should be, stoned and shot with arrows and stabbed with swords and cut with knives or whatever. Like basically kill anybody that gets close. He goes up there and he comes down later with the tablets of stone.
40 days later. 40 days and 40 nights later.
Yeah. And it was so long that they thought that he was never coming back.
Yeah.
So he comes back down and he sees that they have, like, in the meantime, they've built themselves a golden calf. Basically, they're worshiping the Apis bull is how I took it, an Egyptian god. So they have just come out of Egypt and they think that he's gone. And so they melt down a whole bunch of gold jewelry that they probably looted on their way out of Egypt, and they build themselves the golden calf, and he sees them reveling around it when he comes down, and he flips out and breaks the tablets. But it's interesting that it says that he suddenly became aware that the writing from the finger of God disappeared off the tablets, and that made them heavy.
Huh.
Right. So when he sees this desecration, or not desecration, but when he sees this this pagan worship thing or whatever, that the writing from God disappears off the tablets, and suddenly Moses can't carry them anymore. They become incredibly heavy, and he drops them to the ground and they break.
Oh, that's crazy. I thought he smashed them in anger.
Right. Well, I'm sure he was mad after he dropped them. But he makes them, melt the calf down. He has a whole bunch of the worst people who were doing the worshiping put to death. And then he climbs back up on the mountain. And when he comes back, the second time, his face is shining. Remember that?
Yeah.
We've talked about this before. So he comes back down the mountain, and his face is luminous to the point to where after that, he always has to veil himself because they're afraid to approach him because his face is weird, glowing. So it makes you wonder what exactly was going on top of that mountain, and what did he really come down with? What was he doing? So what's interesting is that in one part of the book, Graham is researching this whole area, and he finds out that there's an ancient Egyptian temple up on that mountain or in that area, and that there's a few unexplained tablets of and other pieces of pottery and other things that have a weird version of Semitic writing on them. Ancient Hebrew, instead of the Egyptian hieroglyphs. And it is the area that Moses was supposed to have been exiled to when he was in exile. And that temple specialized in mining and metallurgy in the area. So they were a quote-unquote temple of priests out in the middle of nowhere because they were mining copper, gold, silver, whatever out of the mountain. So they were aware of all the metal resources in that area, and this is the area where Moses would have been staying in exile, and that would have been a perfect place for him because he is a wizard, right? He does belong to the priest class, but he has to flee from the fact that he killed that guy.
Right.
So he would have been familiar with whatever weird metallurgical stuff was on the mountain already. Okay. So when he brings the Israelites out there, he specifically brings them to this mountain where he already has done 40 years of surveying and digging and of the metallurgy there. And then he forbids anybody from coming up there. And then he climbs up there and does a whole bunch of blasting because they see huge clouds and explosions and everything like that they take to be God doing something. But it could also be Moses mining and doing metallurgy of some kind. He's doing some sort of process. The first set of tablets that he comes down with are not right. The second time when he comes down, his face is glowing, and that may mean that whatever process he was doing had succeeded that time because it was, and the sign of it was that it had affected him somehow.
Yeah.
And those are what goes into the ark. And that is when it becomes a dangerous machine.
Right.
So it's unclear what exactly he got from the mountain up there, but it seems to have been some sort of metallurgical process that it could have been. And when the tablets are described, they're very, they describe them as being like sapphire, as being flexible, but very strong. Flexible. It doesn't sound like stone to me.
Right.
They were transparent, colored like sapphire, so blue, I guess. The writing was upon them, whatever the writing was. The writing was upon them by the finger of God. They were transparent, they were blue colored, they were flexible and very strong, and they would not shatter. Plastic?
That's crazy. Yeah. Right.
What's flexible and clear,
Liquid crystal.
Right. It reminds me of the legend of the emerald tablets of Tahoti too, of Thoth, right? They're described in the same way, flexible, but they look like emerald. They were clear green. They had the writing written upon them, and they were some ancient Egyptian tradition. Anyway.
That is, yeah.
So those are what go in the ark, and those are what make it dangerous.
I had always associated like he leaves and then they start getting bored and start worrying, oh, he's gone now.
Yeah.
Let's build break out the calf, like build the golden calf. Because they're still stuck in the...
and they're dancing around pagan style.
I always took that story to be sort of a esoteric processional idea.
Yeah.
Like they were still in the age of Taurus, and they like were moving to the age of the land.
Aries.
Yeah. The ram, which is all the symbolism of Christianity and everything, like the
ram and fish. Yeah. Well, that was this is pre-Christian, so it is the ram, and then you get into Pisces, which is the era of Jesus
of Christ. Yeah. But I'm just saying okay, so in the Old Testament, there's always like the sacrificial lamb.
Yeah, or ram. Yeah. I agree that it was the age of Aries. And so he's like, you're worshiping the wrong one.
Yeah, exactly. They weren't astronomers.
Yeah. It just ruined all of his synchronicities when he came back down the mountain.
He came down the mountain with the proper tablet and he put it inside the ark and he was like, okay, boys, let's go.
We've got to hide this thing for this guy to find later. There's a prophecy of a man with a whip, and he shall find it. Well, so what we're trying to work our way up to is why was the ark gone when the Templars were digging beneath the Temple Mount, right?
Yeah.
So let's see, where was I going to go with it? So after Solomon's death, so Solomon builds a temple and he puts the ark in there. After Solomon's death, Jerusalem starts to fall under harder times. They get raided, invaded 3 times. The first one was by an Egyptian pharaoh called Shishak. He was from Egypt, and he raided all the way into all the way through Israel or whatever, but he didn't seem to ever go into Jerusalem itself. There's no evidence, no records. And they found writing, he actually inscribed it in Karnak. There's a description that depicts the entire thing. And he's never in Jerusalem. And they're able to figure this out because of the way everything is arranged in it, the way the Egyptians arranged it. It was by geographical points, and there's no room for Jerusalem to have been in there ever. So the assumption is that he never actually went to Jerusalem, even though he raided all through quote unquote Canaan, the Promised Land. The next one was Jehoash, which was Israel had split into 2 countries. There was a very strange how this is happening. Like Egypt did this too, North and South Egypt or whatever.
Yeah.
So there was a North and South. It was Jordan and Israel. Jehoash was the king of the other one, the one that didn't have Jerusalem, whichever one that was. I don't remember. He also, it says that he got into Jerusalem and that he raided the treasuries, but he never actually went to the temple. So he raided the treasuries and took a bunch of the treasuries that were around in the temple area, but not the temple itself. He didn't go in. The next guy who raids it, Nebuchadnezzar, he does. But he burns the temple down, which is weird because it's stone. I've never been able to figure this out. Like, he burned the temple down. Okay, all right. How'd you do that? But he basically goes in and he steals all the stuff. And they actually describe it, but they're describing him going in and getting all the treasures out of the temple and getting all this stuff. But there's no mention of the ark or the gold plates of the room that the ark was in, or the enormous golden cherubim that Solomon had built to cover the ark in there. So it seems like that room was bare.
Yeah, and those were solid gold.
Right.
The cherubim.
Huge,
so
like
that would have been like, grab those first, then take the walls and the floor and the ceiling.
Yeah. Get the box out of there, grab those statues, and then get the walls and floor and ceiling. Okay, so the Watcher says the two kings of Israel were northern Israel and the southern Judah. Judah was the one that contained Jerusalem. So Israel raids Jerusalem. Very strange. So, and there's actually, again, with the Babylonian thing, with Nebuchadnezzar, there are records, and they show them carrying things like the menorah. Like, in their records, there's depictions of them coming out of the temple carrying all these treasures, and one of them is the menorah, the seven, the it's the 7 candle thing. Candlestick. Yeah. Very, very distinctive shape. It shows these guys all coming out with all this treasure, and one of them's carrying that thing. No mention of the ark or anything like that in there. So it seems to have been gone by the time that raid happens.
Yeah.
So when you dig down into it, what you find out is that there was a reformer king, Josiah, who rebuilds the temple. And he actually asked the Levites to bring him the ark, and they don't respond. They don't bring him the ark, right? And it seems like they don't have it. So when you look at the two kings of Israel were before him, Manasseh and Amon. One of them ruled for, 15 years, and the other one only 2. Those guys were considered abominations. They actually went into the Holy of Holies and they put in a statue of Asherah and Baal, Dagon, or whatever.
Yeah.
So they were pagans, quote unquote. Right. They brought back the old religion.
They tricked all the people into bringing all their food and everything and leaving it for the golden statue to eat.
Right. So that was called an abomination or whatever. And so the idea is that the priest class, when that guy took the throne, the priest class figured out what he was going to do. They couldn't fight him, but there's no way they would have let the ark be in the room with these other pagan statues, and he wouldn't have wanted the ark in there with it either, so they just took it. That's the idea. That's when it seems to disappear from the story, is in that period. It just vanishes from the ark, or from the temple at that point. And then, despite all these other kingdoms who did not care anything about Israel's treasures and would have just been like, yeah, we've got this box full of these rocks, they would have just listed it off. None of them seem to have it, so it disappears from the story
without mention.
Right.
Too.
There's no mention of it. Yeah.
So I tend to think that Solomon planned for the thing to be taken. Like
Could be.
That's the way, because he was supposedly incredibly wise, right? The most wise, and he could, in all the stories about him, it's like he would already know what was going to happen, or he would like predict all these situations that were going to happen.
Right.
So
But what's also interesting that I paid attention to was that in all these raids where a major accounting is taken from these various peoples from Nebuchadnezzar mainly is the one. He's the only one that penetrated all the way into the temple and took everything. What isn't accounted for are the walls, the ceiling, the floor, the ark, the 2 giant cherubim, or the pillars.
Right.
Everything else, and I mean like thousands of bowls, like all kinds of shit and they listed all of them off. Yeah. 10,000 silver bowls, like 100 giant 30-gallon golden bowls, whatever. Like they're all listed, meticulously listed. in the booty that they took from. So you would think that like big bronze pillars or these enormous golden statues like took walls, ceiling, floor of Holy of Holies chamber, right, and all the nails.
500.
642 golden nails. So I think that it seems obvious to me that during the reign of Manasseh, when he was desecrating the temple and the priests came and got the ark, well, they couldn't carry those cherubim out of there, those giant golden statues, or the walls of the floor or the ceiling, or the golden, or the pillars. So there's this other interesting legend that says that that the ark and the other main treasures of the temple, just before Nebuchadnezzar got to where he was going and was coming in there to raise it, that they stashed it beneath the Shatia, the foundation stone, which was the floor of the Holy of Holies, right? And we know that there is the Well of Souls beneath that there's this weird tunnel that goes underneath that. So if you go in the Dome of the Rock, right, it's just a big, it's the top of the mountain, and that's called the foundation stone. The Shatia, I think is what they call it. Yeah. Whoops. Yeah, I have it on. Yeah, Shatia. The foundation stone for the stone from which the world was built, basically.
Yeah.
It's the foundation of the world. So beneath that is called the Well of Souls. It's a little cavern underneath that. And that's a known place. And there's this idea that Solomon, like you said, had foreseen that all this would happen. And he dug it in the Well of Souls. He hid an entrance to the massive cavern system that was natural, that was beneath all that in the mountain itself. And that's where the ark and these other treasures were stored right before Nebuchadnezzar got there. But it's clear that the ark wasn't even there in the first place because of Manasseh.
Yeah, the other kings that...
Right.
Yeah. So it was either already down there by that point.
Right, and that's where they took it from. But what I think is interesting is that these guys couldn't have carried those pillars or the statues and so on and so forth. So that's what the Templars found.
Yeah.
They found Joachim and Boaz with the Shamir and all those writings, and maybe those golden statues and other stuff, but not the ark.
Yeah, that's crazy.
They kept looking for the ark, though. That's what's interesting. So now we're back with the Templars. This is why they didn't find the ark, because it wasn't there in the first place, right? But they keep looking for it. And they get enough information from what they find down underneath the temple to know maybe where it is. Maybe the priests, the Levites who came and got it, left some sort of sign.
Yeah, maybe.
Some sort of indication, that, man, they didn't know where they were going at that point either. But they fled Jerusalem because at the time of the rule of Manasseh, it was a bad place to be if you were a worshiper of Yahweh. And had his relic. So they actually just left the country, and they actually went to Egypt. And what's interesting is that some of the Falasha today still remember the story of their ancestors coming down, and they're like, well, they didn't come all the way to Ethiopia straight away, right? They actually stayed in Egypt for a long time. And Graham's like, wait, they were in Egypt? Where? And they were like, oh yeah, they were in Egypt for hundreds of years, and they built a temple there. Yeah. And he's like, where was that? In Aswan? He's like,
where all the granite was mined.
Yeah. And it actually turns out to be on the island of Elephantine in the Nile. So they picked an island in the middle of the river, and they built a temple there, and it's known that it was there. There's nothing left of the temple, but there's plenty of textual references to it, plus a big Jewish settlement.
Yeah. And
they clearly lived on the island for several centuries. And then for some reason, the Egyptians burned their temple down again.
Well, somebody else came in and raided Egypt and like burned all their temples down.
Yeah.
And then left the Israelite temple.
Right.
So the Egyptians were like, oh, you must be on their side. So they came in and destroyed it.
Yeah. They knocked all our temples down. Now we're going to knock yours down. No. Yeah. So that fixed a gap problem that Graham was having with the apparent time between
Bathsheba or whatever and the stories in in the Bible where the ark is.
Right. There seemed to have been a
supposedly
gap
present.
of a couple hundred years of when it disappeared from Israel, of when it disappeared from Jerusalem, and before it appeared in Ethiopia itself. There was this
Yeah.
enormous gap of time. And he finally solved that problem by figuring out, oh, they actually stayed in Egypt and lived on this island for several centuries. So if they fled Jerusalem in 700 BC, which is right about the right time, 200 years after Solomon's death or so, but they don't appear in Ethiopia until 500 BC. There's this gap of 200 years there,
Yeah.
and it's fixed perfectly by this Solomonic temple that was on the island of Elephantine in Egypt, outside of Aswan,
Yeah.
in the River Nile.
Yeah.
And what's cool is if you follow the legend, you keep tracing the ark all the way into Ethiopia. They were following the Nile all the way, right? But they went up the Blue Nile, not the other side, not the one that people thought for a long time was the actual source, but the real source called the Blue Nile, where all the water comes, because there's like heavy rains in the highlands in Abyssinia in Ethiopia coming down off the mountains, and it fills up this lake Tarna, and then like the lake overflows, and that's what dumps all the water all the way down the Nile and gives Egypt all the silt every season to do their farmland. That's where the source of the water's from. They followed that all the way up there and built another temple on an island in the middle of the lake. So they got into this habit of living on little bitty islands inside of water sources, because that's a safe, if you're carrying the Ark of the Covenant, it's a safe place to do it.
Wow. That's crazy.
So all those islands in the book, Graham Hancock is like in this enormous lake visiting all these islands, trying to find out which fricking one of these islands has the fricking temple there they brought. God damn it! And he's paying all this money. He keeps going. He's like, it's not this one yet. He goes to the next one. It's not that one either. Damn it! There's temples on all of them in these islands in this giant lake. But they eventually brought there, and then once they're in Ethiopia, there were enormous wars going back and forth because Christianity shows up, and then there's this huge war between them, and then the Falashas go and build all these castles way up in the mountains, and the Christians are raiding them all the time, and they're raiding the Christians and kicking their asses, and it goes back and forth, and then there's that whole thing with Lalibela. So let's see. While the Templars were in Jerusalem still, after they had come back to Europe and established their order, but while they were still in, they maintained their order in Jerusalem for 80 years until the Christians lost Jerusalem to Saladin, the Muslim or the Ottoman general or whatever.
Yeah.
So the Templars had an establishment still on the Temple Mount area in Jerusalem, but at this point they knew that the Ark was not there. Right, but they had exploded all of that. At this point, they're wealthy, thousands of members. They meet an exiled Ethiopian prince, Lalibela, in Jerusalem. He leaves Ethiopia in exile. His evil stepbrother or whatever takes the throne from him, or takes the throne, and he flees and goes to Jerusalem, probably tracing the roots of who knows what he was doing. But he eventually meets the Templars. And he's like, yeah, man, my brother is got the throne and I'm supposed to be the freaking emperor. And they're like, you're from Ethiopia? We'll help you out, bro. Because they seem to know at this point. They're still tracking down the Ark. And now they've got the opportunity to get in good with an Ethiopian
monarch.
A monarch. Yeah, if they can get in there and help him take his throne, then they've got it made. Who knows? They may even talk to him about the legend of the Ark. But Lalibela eventually goes back and successfully takes the throne from his brother. And then he, quote unquote, commissions a whole bunch of Christian churches to be built. And they are still a mystery to this day. So that these churches, some of you may know, there are these monolithic rock cut temples in Ethiopia.
Yeah.
Same deal where you go up on the mountain and somebody just cut a hole in the mountain and left a church, right? Or a temple. And there's a whole bunch of them all throughout this area of Ethiopia, and they are attributed to the reign of Lalibela, right? But if you look at the Ethiopian legends about those temples and how they were built, they say that they were built by angels using the finger of God. If you look closer, they say that it was white men with red or blonde hair that were with Lalibela, basically, that they did it on his orders.
Yeah.
And it took them 20 years to do it, build all these churches. And they're all monolithic, and Graham actually goes into one of them, the biggest one. And it's crazy because if you look at some of these churches from the top down, they are a Templar cross, the perfect freaking equal-armed Templar cross from the top down. And there's symbols all throughout the churches that is clear. It's like they were like, yeah, we would hear, right? Freaking French guys. This is why I also was thinking about this today, that it's interesting to me, the whole Monty Python and the French guys with the Grail.
Everywhere they're looking for the Grail, there's the French guys,
and they've already got one, you know?
That's true.
They freaking knew, man. Those guys who wrote that script, they knew. I'll ask him, but I don't think he'll be very keen.
Yeah.
He's already got one, you see.
Yeah, so the idea is that the Holy Grail is the actual Ark of the Covenant. It's the same symbolism. They're interchangeable.
Right.
So seeking the Holy Grail is essentially seeking the Ark.
Right.
And the Templars were doing that, and they end up going to Ethiopia and building all these crazy rock-cut temples after they dug under the Dome of the Rock.
And found the Shamir. Right.
And so learned all this sacred geometry and how to...
Right. Then they go to Ethiopia and just like start cutting whole temples out of stone using this tool that they found beneath this.
That's freaking just...
And so when Graham is in one of the main temples, this is one of those things where you're just like, damn it. He's in there and he's looking at all these sculptures and it's beautiful in there. And there's this enormous pillar and it's wrapped in cloth, all this brocaded cloth, everything all the way up. And the high priest in the temple in there. And by the way, all these churches are all connected to each other by enormous labyrinths of underground tunnels.
Yeah.
And there are Templar crosses in all of them everywhere. But anyway, the priest tells him that the secret of how the temples were constructed is written by the finger of God on that stone pillar.
It's another Boaz pillar.
Right. Yeah. And Graham is like, well, can you unwrap it so I can see it? And the guy's like, no, that would be sacrilege, right?
Yeah.
It's never unwrapped. The secret is kept. Shamir.
Why is it never unwrapped and is the secret kept? We just want to build pyramids.
So keep going with this story. So the Templars are now in good with Lalibela in Ethiopia, and they seem to have access to the Ark itself, because there's actually a description later on by an Armenian. I can't remember if he was a priest or a cartographer or something like that, but he comes in the late 12th century AD, and Graham Hancock has actually led to this guy's description, because he was like, look, everybody who's quote unquote been shown the Ark throughout history that Ethiopia has just seen these tablets, these little tablets that are actually facsimiles of the things that are supposed to be inside the Ark. Right. They're not actually the Ark itself, and they're just copies of whatever they think is in the Ark. So, you know, and this guy's like, well, actually, this guy came and he actually was shown the Ark itself, and he wrote a description of it in his. He was I don't know what he was, but he was doing a survey of temples in Egypt, and he actually surrounded into the surrounding areas, and he went into Ethiopia. Okay. And so he writes a description that the Ethiopians have the Ark of the Covenant of God, blah, blah, blah. He describes it exactly how it's supposed to look. It's covered in gold. It's made of acacia wood and all this sort of stuff. It has the cherubim on top with the wings touching each other, and the mercy seat. The lid is like a hand's breadth width of gold. And he says that it's carried in certain religious ceremonies 4 times a year. They use it or whatever, and it's carried by tall white men with red and gold hair. So this is the period when the Templars are in Ethiopia, and it seems that Lalibela has actually given them actual access to the Ark itself. But now they have they don't seem to be interested. They've just established themselves in Ethiopia. Now they've got the Shamir and all the stuff in the pillars and whatever else they found down in there. And now they have access to the Ark itself. This is the time when Wolfram starts writing his Parzival story. which is the Grail story that he wrote that has all this Ark stuff in it, right?
Yeah.
This is also when the north porch of Chartres Cathedral is being built with all of its Sheba allegories and Ark stuff. So they seem to know where it is at this point, and they're making references to where it is because they've got it. They found it.
Wait, was I calling her Bathsheba? She's Queen of Sheba.
Queen of Sheba, yeah. She wasn't Bathsheba. That was David's
My bad.
hotness.
That's right. That's right.
But he did see her at a bath. So
yeah.
it's close.
I got that wrong. Sorry.
So there is still more to this story, guys, but we are at an end of the show.
No.
I think this is going to be a 2-part deal. What do you guys think about that?
Let's
What?
keep going.
Just keep going? No. There will be a part 2 next week. Yeah, so I want to talk about that. I said in the Contact the Cabin thing that we were maybe just going to do a show every other week. We've dropped that idea. We're going to do a show every week from this point on. So just could go ahead and get rid of that whole idea. So we'll be doing this show, our regular podcast show, as well as publishing whatever material we get from the Contact of the Cabin conferences each week.
Whenever I get around to editing them.
Right.
Yeah.
Every week.
Actually, the editing of that first one was such a pain that I just decided, since we're going to be doing a show every week anyway, I'm just going to drop that unedited.
Yeah.
So if you want to check it out,
It'll
cool.
be unedited. Yeah.
It's just going to be in there with all of the technical difficulties, just all of the talking over everybody that just naturally happens in a big group conference.
Yeah. All right. Where's my paper of stuff? Here it is. All right, you guys can get a hold of us at brothersoftheserpent@gmail.com. And you can go to the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. Give us comments there. Check out the Encyclopedia. Check out the glossary.
You can check us out on Twitter at Snake Bros with no vowels, SNKBRS. Have conversations with Russ. I monitor it, but I don't talk much on Twitter. It's mostly Russ.
That's right. Yeah. If you're talking to Snake Bros on Twitter, it's Russ. Also, don't forget to give us donations if you can. Any amount helps. Send us Pi 3.14 or Evil 6.66. We love people sending us evil money. You can find the donation button on the website, brothersoftheserpent.com. On the upper right, it's called the Snake Bros Pyramid Scheme because it will send us straight to pyramids.
Yeah. Also, share the shows. That really helps too.
Yep.
It's akin to sending us money because more people listen to the show, thereby raising the probability we'll receive money. I'm just joking.
The more often you share the shows, the more often people will send us evil.
Yeah, or give us reviews. That really helps, and we love reading them.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for all the comments and the reviews. They've been great. So I really appreciate that. And also don't forget about History Shift. At History Shift on Twitter, and you can look him up on YouTube at History Shift. He is the one that has been making all of our videos. He has now got our entire back catalog up on YouTube. So you can also look us up on YouTube, Brothers of the Serpent YouTube channel. Follow us there. Follow History Shift. Brandon Bricks, he has been doing an awesome amount of work for us. And he sent us evil, so he's great. Thanks, bro. We really appreciate it. You're definitely awesome. Oh, yeah. And also, he has been going on awesome Snake Bros, Snake Forest hiking trips. He lives in Montana, and he's going around out there looking at ancient glacial erratics and possible human constructions, dolmen-looking things. So if you want to go do that with him and make sure he doesn't 411 or die somehow, get lost and die when he's looking for dolmens, get a hold of him on Twitter and send him a private message at History Shift.
Also want to thank Alan, the Minister of Travel, for the Contact at the Cabin thing. We've been working with him, and he brought us into the fold over there with the Grimerica guys, and we're very honored to be a part of the team.
Yes.
And it's been a lot of fun. And
Yeah.
we're really looking forward to the trip.
Yeah, and there's only a few seats left, guys, so if you want to go to Contact the Cabin, then go to badcomet.com and sign up. There's only a few spots left, and there's also a raffle. So if you got $20, you can buy a raffle ticket. If you think you can make the time to go and possibly pay for your own travel, but you can't afford the actual spot, you can buy a $20 raffle ticket and maybe win the spot for $20. And they're actually raffling off of one of the really nice bedrooms.
Oh,
so
wow.
you can try that. Darren recommends buying 3 raffle tickets to up your odds.
Yeah, I think they only sell 30 tickets for the raffle.
Right. So if you buy 3, you have a 1 in 10 chance.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yep. So go to badcomet.com to look that up. It's Contact at the Cabin. We're going to be hanging out there with Randall Carlson, Brandon Powell of the Wim Hof Method, and a bunch of other really cool people. And we're going to be there all week. So if you want to hang out with us, maybe, instead of Randall Carlson. Yeah, so check that out. Contact at the Cabin with Randall Carlson. Sign up, guys. It's going to be awesome. And I think that's it.
Yep. Thank you.
Yep. That was it for the Ark of the Covenant. But we'll have part 2 next week, I promise. And we will go into more depth and find out what's really going on here.
And we'll listen back to this show and figure out all the places we missed.
Yeah, there's a lot of details we didn't get into.
I'm still reading the book. So, not even done with the book yet. It's a good book.
Good night, Adamu. Shamir.